Hey there, I'm Jane Sawyer, and this is Jane Sawyer Makes Spooky Plants. In addition to being a person who likes to make stuff, I am also a bit of a crazy plant lady. The perfect intersection of my two passions can be embodied in Miss Thornhill's classroom in the Netflix series Wednesday, or in Morticia's greenhouse from the '93 Addams Family movie. Like these two icons, I would love to have a collection of spooky plants one day. Today we're gonna start off that collection. We're making spooky versions of my favorite houseplants. Now, I want these plants to be well crafted and artful. I know I could probably just throw some plastic crap together and get something passable, but I really want to keep these pieces for a long time, maybe add to the series over the next couple of years. So even though I'll be using cheap materials wherever possible, because we knew I'm a frugal one, the craftsmanship is still going to be really important to me. So if that sounds like something you're into, stick around. But first, every plant needs a pot. I have a few sizes of cheap terracotta pots here. They're way too new for spooky plants though. Very, very carefully, I'll take a few chips out of the rims with this tiny hammer. I don't know where this little hammer came from, but it's handy for crafting. Then I'll flick and smear on some earthy colors to grunge them up. Finally, I'll drip on some watered down brown acrylic. I love how this looks on the pots when they're dried. Okay, let's get started. The first houseplant we're gonna start with is the spider plant. It's got a bit of a spooky name, but this staple of the 70s is pretty basic. Basic isn't bad though, like these plants are popular for a reason. I have two. I got this one from a big box store. It's supposed to be a curly version, but I got it a few months ago and none of the new growth is very curly. I got this one just recently at my favorite plant shop, Plant Goals. You can see it's already got a little baby plant coming off of it. And I've been looking for a solid green spider plant, so I was super happy to find him. Are you ever at the dollar store and you see something and you're like, well, that's weird and cool. I gotta be able to make something with that, right? Well, these hair rollers were that thing for me. So I've had these a while, but I think they'll make really good legs for a spooky version of a spider plant. I start by pulling the caps off of each end of the hair roller, then I glue in a few inches of armature wire into one end. I want my spider legs to have a bit of a taper, so I'm achieving that by wrapping some yarn around the foam. Hi, me again. I actually lost the original footage of this bit and I didn't have any more hair rollers to refilm it. So I drove 45 minutes to the nearest Dollar Tree. I live in the middle of nowhere and they didn't have any hair rollers. So then I drove to another dollar store and they didn't have any rollers. So I drove the 45 minutes home and just tried to make a reasonable facsimile out of a pool noodle. So that's why the next bit of footage is gonna look a little different. But I guess what we did learn here is that if you want to make this and you can't find the hair rollers, you can always use a chunk of pool noodle. I thought it would be cool to give this spider plant some fuzzy legs. I have this green roving. This stuff is typically spun into yarn or used by felters. My kids actually got this in a needle felting kit and they were okay with me borrowing some. I wrap this roving around the foam and then I use a felting needle to stick it in there. Here's a close look at the felting needle. There's barbs on the needle that snag on the fibers in the roving and basically tangle them into the foam. I just keep working my way down the leg, wrapping on more roving, then stabbing to stick it in. I've never tried anything like this technique before, but I think it worked great. You can still bend the appendage and it's got a fuzzy, spidery look. Let's bring our flower pot back now. Off camera, I cut out a circle of cardboard. This just fits into the pot and I can poke the limbs in like this. I poke the tail of armature wire into the cardboard and secure that in with gobs of hot glue. I'm gonna do that in stages because I want to put a lime green highlight and a purple low light on each of the spider legs. I'll just continue adding legs and sponging on the highlights until I've put them all in there. I covered up the cardboard off camera. Stay tuned to the next two plants and I'll show you 2 different techniques for doing that. At this point, I'm thinking it looks pretty good, but I thought it would be cool if the spider plant has some webs on its legs. Maybe this version of the spider plant catches flies to eat. So I took a bit of this light blue roving and stretched it across the legs. Also got these flies from the dollar store. I didn't want to glue them on because I wasn't sure if I would like them. So I cut the points off some pins and then just super glued them into the fly's belly and then poked them into the foam. I'm still not sure if I like it better without them. I worry the flies might like cheapen the look a little bit. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. I'm still undecided as to whether I'll take them off or not. Our second plant, and I think this is my favorite, is a carnivorous plant. I've had 2 carnivorous plants before. I had the Venus flytrap and a Cape sundew. They did not thrive under my care, so I don't have them anymore. But I do still love me a carnivorous plant, both real and imagined. This is Audrey 2, the famous man-eating plant from Little Shop of Horrors, and she will definitely be the inspiration for the carnivorous plant that we're making. If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you already know that this dude starts with a walnut. You don't need to make a hinge to do this project. This was overkill, but this little DIY wire hinge has kind of become my signature at this point. I'm using polymer clay for this one. I'm pushing some clay into the walnut to smooth it out. I've seen this done before. Making a killer plant out of a walnut is not my idea. I've got a Pinterest board where I've linked all of my reference images. You can follow me there and click through to the original posts. I'm gonna set that aside and then use some white clay to make some tiny little teeth. I make a whole bunch of teeth and bake these together with the walnut. After the clay was cooled, I remember that I actually hate painting inside tiny mouths and I have colored clay, so I redid the inside of the mouth in purple. Now we're gonna make a long snake of clay and fit that into the mouth. We'll do this on the top and bottom jaw. These are going to be the gums. Now we can retrieve our little pile of teeth. I'm going to use some oven bake poly clay adhesive on the base of each tooth. And then I'm building up her chompers to make a spooky set of plant jaws. The way I make a monster tongue is super easy. Roll out a sausage and taper each end. Fold it in half, give it a little bend, and this is the easiest tongue going. If you want to go for bonus points, you can add a bit of texture. I'm just gonna pop her in and give her a bake. I'm using some armature wire to make her a stem. If you don't have armature wire, fencing wire is a good, cheaper alternative you can get at your hardware store. Just using this blob on the back here to lock the hinge into position. A long snake of clay with tapered ends makes the lips. I got this sculpting tool for free with a Dollar Tree toothbrush and I use it to make the lip texture. I'm going to use more clay to build up her stem. I really take the time to smooth this out nicely. Then I use a silicone tool to divide the stem into segments. Before baking this bad girl again, I'm gonna add 3 small leaves to cover the transition between the stem and the nut. But Jane, how did you make the leaves? Here's how to trick people into thinking you're good at sculpting leaves. Grab yourself a BAB of clay. Now grab a juicy leaf with lots of texture. I think this one is cabbage or something. It was rogue in my garden. Now really press that leaf down into the clay. I don't have a clay roller, so I just use a jar as a rolling pin. Gently peel up the leaf. Now give this a bake or let it dry, cure, whatever. This will be your negative texture mold. To make a leaf, flatten out a teardrop-shaped piece of clay. Press this down into the mold. This will be the back of your leaf. If you also want a bit of texture on the front of your leaf, flip it over and press it down gently with a clean, dry sponge. This will give you the texture on the front without smushing the stuff you just did. Pinch the edges a bit and repeat as needed. At this point, I give these 3 large leaves and the stem head assembly another bake. We have one more component we need to sculpt for this dude. She's got some long, viney tentacle things. We'll do this in 2 steps. Firstly, cover some armature wire in clay, then really smooth them out. Give those a bake. Secondly, make some little leafy sheath thingies and smooth them onto the vines. Bake those again, and we're done sculpting. Before I paint, I'm just dry fitting everything together here. I've cut a circle out of a scrap of EVA foam floor mat that fits into my plant pot. And I have a space here where I can fit her head stem in. I'll put a few rocks in the bottom because I was worried about her being a bit top heavy. I cut a little slit into the foam for the tentacles to slip in. And then I'll just glue the larger leaves into place like this. It all fits and looks good, so I'm gonna go ahead and paint. I base coat everything in dark purple. Now I'm gonna use a dry brush technique with this palette of colors. Let's go. Now we'll put her back together. I glue it all in there really well. She's looking great, but let's give her a few finishing touches to just push her over the edge. These are crumbs from the bottom of a bag of dried moss. I always save them in this jar. I know what it looks like, but it's good stuff for covering up the foam here. I also mix up a bit of resin for some drool, but if you don't like working with resin, a gloss varnish would work too. I slap it in there and I try to play with it a bit as it cures to make some drips and saliva strings. Our third and final plant is a string of hearts. Given the name, I thought this one would be a good one to attempt in spooky version. Initially, I thought just maybe I could make some like anatomical heart-shaped leaves, but then I was worried that might be a little too camp or kitsch. So I got the idea to actually combine this indoor house plant with one of my favorite outdoor garden plants, the bleeding heart. So we're gonna make a bleeding string of hearts. Let's do it. Here's a leaf from my string of hearts. Don't worry, she's still got lots. These leaves are freaking tiny, so to stop myself from going crazy, I'm gonna size them up quite a bit for my spookier version. I'm cutting a whole bunch of a few different sizes out of this inexpensive craft foam. I've had this wood burning tool since I was 12, and I've seen other crafters use heat to give texture to foam, so let's give it a go. I'm focusing on carving a channel down the center of each of the leaves, and then I'm adding a bit of texture to each side. I'm also using the edge of the tool to round over the edges a bit. And then just quickly, I tap the barrel of the wood burner on the back of the leaf so I can give it a more organic shape. This actually really stinks, so I am going to grab an extension cord and set up outside so I don't make myself sick with the fumes. And then I will be back after I have done all of these. While I'm working on this, I want to tell you about my favorite plant shop, Plant Goals. My friend Desiree opened this shop in an 85 square foot unit in November 2019. They have kicked butt ever since. They're in a bigger shop now that is the coolest and most inclusive space to shop, and they continue to get more and more popular through Canada and the US on social media because they are just the most delightful and knowledgeable people over there. And Desiree has just written her first book, Plant Pests 101. It is too risky and not to have this info if you love plants. Don't be like me and wait until your plants are covered in bugs. Order this book today at plantgoals.ca/Jane Sawyer Makes. Link in the description. Now that I've got all the leaves shaped, I'm going to start arranging them in pairs. This is how they grow on the real string of hearts plant. I'm going to cut a little bit of floral wire and make a loop in the center. I also zigzag both ends. This just helps to glue these stems onto the leaves. I'm using my favorite dollar store 5-minute epoxy. I dunk in that little zigzag and smack it down on my leaf and then hide the wire with a little bit of black tissue paper. I let everything dry overnight and now we can start painting. I'm priming everything with a dark brownish purple paint to which I've added a bit of white glue and some cornstarch. Now if we go back to our leaf here, you can see the color is kind of mottled and broken. It almost looks like sponge painting. So guess how we're gonna paint these? Yep, this is fast and accurate to the real plant, so we're gonna sponge paint the lot. Let's do it. Now, this is where this project started to get a little bit stupid. I was convinced that I wanted to have it look like my hearts were dripping red, oozing sap from their centers. So I was trying to think of a way to approach that, but I don't think this was the best way. I used some monofilament fishing line, which is unwieldy by nature, and I started building red droplets onto the ends of these with UV resin. I'm gonna cut this process way down for you, but know that it sucked and I won't ever be doing this again. I hate the color I used. I don't know. There's just so much work that went into achieving this effect off camera. I'm not sure whether it was worth it. Let me know in the comments if you think it turned out. After I put all the drops on all the freaking leaves, I grabbed some more of those foam scraps and cut out a circle to fit in my pot. I'm gonna hide that foam with a bit of sheet moss. And now I've lined up all my leaves and I'm gonna string them all onto vines of floral wire. I poke a hole through the sheet moss and foam with a pokey tool and stick the vine wire in there. In a couple places, I made a little staple out of wire to really secure things together. I'm really thrilled with how the spider plant and the carnivorous plant turned out. The string of hearts is still growing on me. My puns are always intended. Let me know what you think in the comments. Think I did a good job here? Please click the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm really going to be focusing a lot more energy into making more long format content here on YouTube. You can read the build article for this and all my projects over at janesawyermakes.com. Subscribe to my socials and I'll see you on the next one.